This is a TVR steering wheel that we're going to be restoring here today. Obviously, one of the most important parts is getting everything masked up to make sure that you don't go damaging any of the press buttons that you see here on the steering wheel. The centre area, we've already masked that up. So we're just going to carry on proceeding to get everything masked up so that we don't damage that with any paint or any of the solvent products. Obviously, masking up is very important. The next most important step is obviously your leather prep, which is our next stage that we are going to go to after everything is masked up. Leather prep is one of the most important parts of the whole process that you're going to have to do to restore your TVR steering wheel, or any steering wheel for that matter. We've used the leather prep from the leather repair company here, as well as the red Scotch pad. I've obviously got gloves on because it's a solvent-based product, and we're spraying it onto the pad and just scrubbing that over the surface of the steering wheel. The purpose of that is so that we can remove as much of the colour as we can. It's also removing grease and grime and dirt and things like that. So we want to make sure that we concentrate fully, obviously on the whole wheel, but we're going to pay particular attention to the areas where you're sort of 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock, which is where your hands would be mainly on this particular wheel, because it's got press buttons there to work various things on this TVR. So obviously prep is an extremely important stage. Once we've prepped it over with the pad, we're then going to wipe it around with the cloth, and as you can see, the colour is coming off, and then we just wipe that around with the cloth to remove any further excess that is on the wheel. And then once we've done that, we would obviously then proceed to dry with the hairdryer so that we can then go to the next stages of the restoration. You should carry on proceeding to rub over the wheel, and as you can see, all the colour is off. Once we've obviously prepped the wheel, we've got to now wipe the whole of the leather down with the alcohol cleaner to ensure that we sort of fully degrease everything, remove any sort of final bits of loose colour that's on there, and just generally degrease it, because now the leather's obviously got no colour on it, so we've sort of exposed all the surfaces completely, so that we need to give that a really good thorough rub over with the alcohol cleaner to finally fully degrease everything, and we're going to do that all the way around, front and back. Obviously, once we've got it all fully wiped over with the alcohol cleaner, the next stage that we're obviously going to get onto is we would give that a quick dry over with the hairdryer, and then that's ready once that's done, obviously, for the painting stages to take place. So it's a very simple sort of process. You must make sure that you prep it fully, then make sure that you wipe it over with the alcohol cleaner, and as you can see, all the colours off there. With this TVR steering wheel, we've obviously done all the prep work, cleaned it over with alcohol cleaner. Now we're using a 320 wet and dry sandpaper, and we're not going over this vigorously or aggressively or anything like that. We're just going over it very, very lightly, just to remove any sort of slight imperfections that you could get on the surface there. There were some scratches from ring marks and stuff like that. So, I mean, we're just going over it very, very lightly, front and back, all the way around, just to give that a quick sand over. It also helps to give us a bit of a key as well, to sort of key in the new paint that's going to be put on there to make sure that it's going to bond, appropriately and effectively for longevity and stuff like that. So just, as I say, we're using the 320 sanding pad that we've got here. Once we've got all that done, what we're then going to have to do, obviously with sanding, we're going to then have to go over the steering wheel again with an alcohol cleaner, and we're going to have to obviously wipe that down to remove any dust and stuff like that, because obviously sanding will create a little bit of dust residue on the surface of the wheel. So we need to go back over the surface and degrease that, with the alcohol cleaner. We've obviously now got all the wheel prepped, and we've wiped in an initial coat of colour. Now we're going to proceed to stipple in the next coating of the paint. This was obviously scanned. We actually scanned and pre-mixed this paint, and we scanned it using our Spectro so that we got a guaranteed match, which we can do for any client anywhere in the world. As long as we've got a sample of leather, we can scan that and match that for you. So we're obviously proceeding to go around and stipple all the colour in all the way around the steering wheel on the front and the back of the wheel. Once that's all done and it's all stippled in, we would obviously go and proceed to dry it, and then we would go to the next level with it. Obviously in the center here where you've got all the perforation, you've got to be really careful. So you'll notice that as we're going through doing the stippling, we're stippling on the wheel itself, and then instead of loading the pad with more paint, we're actually just stippling the actual perforation area either side of the central part of the wheel so that we don't fill the holes up with paint. So we're just going around sort of putting like a couple of layers on the wheel to ensure that we've got fantastic coverage all over the steering wheel, and that's just done with the premix colour that we made for this TVR. Next stage is obviously we've got to dry it all. Make sure it's dried thoroughly so that you can then obviously proceed to all the next stages of the restoration of your steering wheel. It's as simple as that. Once the first coat's obviously been applied and it's been fully dried and you've left that to sit for a few minutes, you can then proceed to put on a second and third coating onto your steering wheel. So again, just carry on proceeding as you would do normally, stippling that on, paying particular attention to the sort of 3 and 9 o'clock positions, or wherever the positions are on your particular steering wheel that would be held more than any other position. Try to get a little bit more sort of paint on those particular areas to give it a lot longer, sort of harder wearing for the future. Obviously dry it over with the hairdryer. Once that's all dried over, your steering wheel is almost then ready for taking to the next stages, which will be the lacquering stages that will be going on. And as you can clearly see, it's looking absolutely fantastic now that it's all fully coloured. So now it's obviously all fully coloured and dried. As you can clearly see, it's all beautifully coloured all the way around. The next stage is to proceed with using the satin lacquer that we've got here. Obviously the lacquer is a lot thinner than what your paint is, so what you're probably going to get as you're actually going over stippling this on to your steering wheel is you're probably going to create like little tiny bubbles. So what you're going to have to try to do with those tiny bubbles is, once you've gone around and done the whole of the wheel here, as we're doing the reverse side first, what we would do is we'd go around and coat the whole thing, and then we're going to try to sort of go around again and sort of almost sort of like disperse the bubbles by tapping it over with the sponge. You can also sort of get rid of that effect by almost like holding your hand over the end of the hairdryer and allowing only a small amount of the warm air to hit the actual steering wheel, and that will actually burst the little tiny air pockets that's created on the lacquer as you've stippled, and it will stop any sort of imperfections appearing. But even if you do get them, don't worry about it. Those can easily be sanded out before we put on the final coats of lacquer anyway, so it's not a problem. Get all that dried off. So we're now going to dry all the back of the steering wheel where we've applied all of this satin lacquer on this TVR steering wheel. So once that's all dried, we can then obviously start to sort of go to the next stage, which is to get the wheel turned over and obviously do all the front side of the steering wheel with the satin lacquer. With the lacquer, it's the same with the paint. You want to look at like sort of 2 to 3 coatings going on there. So if you can sort of get 2 to 3 coatings of lacquer going on there as well onto the wheel, you're going to give it a lot of protection. You're going to protect it long term from sort of grease and sweat and stuff like that, and it's going to make it easier to clean in the future, so that you can just sort of wipe that over with a white terry towel with a bit of leather cleaner on it, and then that's just going to wipe any dirt and grime off. But obviously try to get a good coating of the lacquer on there as you possibly can, because obviously the lacquer is going to stop the paint from wearing. It's going to stop grease and grime and things attacking the actual paint and breaking down those layers. All the products from the leather repair company are a marine grade product as well, so you rest assured that you are dealing with an OEM sort of standard product that is of phenomenal quality for it to be able to withstand the harsh conditions of the marine environment, which is how we designed them originally. We designed them to be some of the best in the world, and that's exactly what we wanted. And as you can see, it's now all clearly lacquered. and we're ready to sort of give it a light sand. Once you've allowed the first sort of 2 coats of lacquer to dry, the next best stage is to actually go over the steering wheel and very, very lightly sand with a 1200 grit wet and dry sandpaper. Obviously you want to do this sanding dry, so just very, very lightly go over. You're not rubbing this over vigorously or anything like that. You are literally just very, very gently wiping it over the surface. The reason for doing this is just to remove any small amounts of dust particles that are maybe in the air that's been attracted to the clear coat lacquer. It's as simple as that, so that the next stage, when you apply the final lacquer, it looks absolutely brilliant. So just wipe that round with a cloth just to remove any dust that you've got on the wheel there from just giving the lacquer a light sand. So obviously, once you've applied the first sort of couple of coats of lacquer, you've then gone over with the 1200 wet and dry and given that a very, very light sand over the surface of the steering wheel to remove any imperfections on there. You would then give it your final coating of the satin lacquer to give that wheel its totally finished appearance and its OEM standard, sort of look again. Once that's done, you can sand that over with like a 3000 wet and dry or a 7000, and what that's doing is just polishing the wheel fully, so it just feels and sort of exudes that quality of luxuriousness that you expect to hold on your TVR steering wheel. This is the TVR steering wheel, completely, fully restored, all back to its former glory when it left the factory at TVR. As you can see, it looks absolutely fantastic and beautiful. Quick recap on what we did. Deep cleaned with LRC1. We then went over it with the leather prep to remove the surface colour and to remove any dirt, grease and grime that was embedded into the leather. We then gave it a wipe over with alcohol cleaner, followed by a 320 grit wet and dry just to give it a bit of key for allowing the paint to take. We then applied the paint, a couple of 2 to 3 layers of paint were applied. We then applied a couple of layers of lacquer, quick 1200 grit wet and dry sanding, final coat of lacquer, then it was polished with a 3 or a 7000 grit paper, and you are given an absolutely amazing, fantastic looking TVR steering wheel, fully restored for a very happy client.